Mr. Beers, do you think that we're live? What do you mean? I actually don't know what music I have selected. What? That was for something completely different. Let's try this one. This is gonna be. This is horrible. All right, let's see. Is this any better? I was trying to do something else with my software, and anyhow, let me know if it's gotten any better, or if I've screwed something up. None? You hear nothing. Well, we're going to. Oh, why in the world would it only be at 3%? That's strange. Well, maybe it's just due to. All right. Anyhow, it's not going to go any. I nearly doubled the volume, so and I actually turned it down for the sake of Mr. West, who found it to be distracting at any higher levels. The basic idea is that it be existent for when we have our pauses. Oh, great. So now we are 3 minutes and 27 seconds into trying to figure out this whole streamy thingy. I think that we got the technical mumbo jumbo ready. Mumbo jumbo jibber jabber stuff. There we go. That's better. And we can then talk about emotions and economics and why in the world people on the left have so much trouble with dealing with certain economical principles. So it's much more valuable for me to cut the lawn with scissors. But I'm pretty sure that you're not going to find anybody that actually claims that it's more valuable for me to cut the lawn with scissors. I see. Well, I think that we know. I know what the title of this stream is going to be. It's going to be cutting the lawn with scissors. I'm trying to remember what the episode number is now. Oh, hello, Mr. Beers. I see your hello world message. Insert next title here. CSC episode 32. Cutting the lawn with scissors. CSC episode 32. It should be saved now. All changes saved. Cutting the lawn with scissors. CSC episode 32. So we can talk exactly about why cutting along with scissors is a bad idea. Although I didn't even realize that that was necessary, but apparently with leftists involved it is. Hmm. Okay. So, why, Mr. Beers, is it a bad idea to to cut grass with scissors? I actually do have a good reason for asking this question, but I would like you to, in excruciating detail, please tell why there other means might be better. Okay. Okay. So we have well, ultimately, then value being subjective to each person. I mean, of course, there are certain things that I think that humanity generally considers as valuable, but then ultimately, if I didn't value some things more than others, we would never have transactions, would we? If I don't value. What do I have here? Do I have something in my pocket that I mean, okay, there's a snotty tissue and a receipt. I'm pretty sure I have some cash here. Okay. If I don't value this less than something else, I'm not trading this for something else. I can go to the store and I can go and use this to buy whatever is marked on the shelves at the store up to 50 euros worth of goods, or go and buy from somebody procuring services up to 50 euros worth of services. And interestingly, there's also the aspect of negotiating. If a deal is open to negotiation, you can go and say, well, I think that it's worth this much. Your service or your product is worth this much to me, and I'm willing to throw this in to make it more worth your time, and so on. And so everyone comes out of that transaction having won something. But this is very difficult for people that have that emotional understanding of value, because they don't see how they can go and spend a great amount of time doing something and not have somebody going and telling them that it's worthy. No, they want to feel good about doing the equivalent of cutting the lawn with scissors. And that works in many aspects. It's not just cutting the lawn with scissors, which everyone will agree is stupid, but uh, for example, if a new technology is used that has been demonstrated to not have adverse effects or something along those lines, being a Luddite and saying I'm not going to adopt this technology for whatever reason means that we make ourselves less effective, less valuable in the fruits of our labor to society, and so we can expect to be compensated or not accordingly. So, yeah, that's a pretty basic economic fact, but one that emotions can tend to really screw up. And that's why a lot of people wind up getting wealthy for doing comparatively little work. I mean, if there's somebody that goes and either, just every week cuts one lawn with a pair of scissors, and that's all he does for 8 hours a day, or probably closer to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Or if somebody is moving, digging a hole and moving dirt into a pile one day and then taking the pile and filling the hole the next day and just going back and forth, well, that person's working very, very hard. Probably way harder than most people that have a net worth of over $10 million, but he's not actually doing anything valuable to anybody, and so he's not going to get compensated accordingly. And it's if someone doesn't want to do something that other people perceive as valuable, or doesn't want to produce for himself that which he values so he doesn't have to rely on somebody else to do exchange with, then he has no position complaining, because he's not going out and getting what he wants. The world is very simple. You want something and you go out and you get it. You figure out what the conditions are, and then you fulfill those conditions to the best of your ability. Sometimes things will blow up in your face, but then you modify your tack accordingly, and you get what you want. Oh no, Mr. Thorbjornsen. Where is the sound? How is it hanging small, shriveled, and always to the... Oh boy. Alright, the stream is resumed, and the stream health is much improved. Good. So anyhow... Oh. Oh boy, that sounds sounds cancerous. Oh boy. So, Sarah Young had, to the best of my understanding, she was making all sorts of tweets that were racist toward white people. And then people on the left are defending her, basically saying it's okay to, so basically people are saying, okay, it's okay to be racist. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I suppose she has the right to say what she wants to say. I mean, I'm not gonna deprive her of that. If especially due to me being male, me being white, if she hates me, I mean, she's allowed to. It's just interesting, the double standards that exist. That's the thing that I think that shining the light on it tends to help. It's like, okay, well, if you're... In which way? What do you mean? Why? And what is the significance? That's odd. I'm working on it. This is strange. Alright, so Caleb's going to keep on talking, and we'll see when we can hear him. I'm going to mess with a few things, see if it won't improve the situation.
I just have to keep making noise. Yeah, I know I've been transmitting audio via Discord. Can you hear me?
All I did was wind up blowing my own ears out. So, bad idea. That didn't work. You can now? That's probably because you were hearing the feedback from my own earpieces. Okay, so our output, we're going to try this. Oh boy. Please do keep on making noise. I don't know. Sing a song. No. That'd be... I won't be able to focus if you sing a song. Alright, there. I exited and re-entered the call, and I think that we can hear you now.
Okay, I am now audible.
At least according to this, to the little green line on my indicator. Yeah.
All right, let me start over my little spiel and re-deliver it, since I am now audible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First of all, let me dig down into the definition of what normal is to explain why this outrage would not have happened 10 years ago. I'm going to have to do some back work. First of all, what is normal for you is whatever you think everyone else thinks is normal. That is to say that your perception of normalcy is based on your perception of everyone else's perception of normalcy. If I believe that everyone else believes that all swans are black, then it follows that what is normal for me is the belief that all swans are black. So normalcy is individual. It is something that applies to individual people, but it applies through their perception of the social milieu. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that there is this charming political correctness, which is what happens when what's normal belief that you know to be false. For example, if I think, oh, well, everybody else is going to be okay with all this stuff Sarah Jung said, then it is normal for me that Sarah Jung's tweets were okay, and I'm not going to speak up about it. And what the really perverse thing about this is that even if the majority of people take exception to what she said, we are still going to have the problem that none of them will say anything because each of them believes that everyone else believes that what she said was okay. And that's what we call political correctness, when your sense of normalcy is distorted by ideology so that you think it's normal to believe things that are false.
So why would people's sense of normalcy be distorted?
Because of propaganda, because of social manipulation through some centralized entity, but social manipulation carried out by a decentralized movement, social manipulation carried out by people all following the same ideology. It's a little bit like a flock of birds. If you look at a flock of birds, every bird follows the bird in front of it. So there's no single bird that controls the flock, but the whole thing still shows cohesion and still moves as a coherent entity because every bird follows the same set of rules. So what happens is that if everyone believes that everyone else believes that this stuff is okay, then everyone will act as if it's okay. Now, in the 1990s, it would not have been okay. We would have all thought it was, we would have all thought that it was, so to speak, awful for her to say these things, and we would have felt fine about saying so, or at least mostly fine. Now, what's going to happen here from the 1990s up until the mid-2000s or so, or even the late 2000s, the mid-20 teens, is that political correctness becomes more and more powerful until people are afraid to even speak up about something like this. But then we passed the peak of that phenomenon, crested the hyperbolic curve, and now we're down back the other side. Or excuse me, the parabolic curve, not hyperbolic. Now we're down the other side, and we're starting to think it's not okay to say that stuff again. Because what happened was, with the advent of the internet, with the advent of independent pundits, with the advent of things like YouTube and social media, and the absence censorship and centralized control of these things, the majority opinion, which is really nothing like the supposedly accepted opinion that we've been led to believe is normal and it's really not, it has now become okay to say in public. And that's why you see everyone on the left running around going, oh my god, racism is cool now, and that's okay because it's an Asian lady. You know, I was being a bit ironic there, but the fact remains that now it's okay for us to bitch about this in public, and I can say things like, well, fuck you, Sarah Jong, kiss my white ass. And my picture is gone from the stream.
It's not anymore. But for some reason, the size of the picture has changed.
Okay, there we go. Now we're back. Yeah, crazy, and that's the reason why this was okay and now is not. And by the way, everybody, I see that we have 4 upvotes and there are 4 people watching, so thank you all. That's great. I'm glad you're all consistently upvoting. Also, feel free to share this on Quora, Minds, Gab, Twitter. If you got a Twitter, go ahead and do all that. You know, I would never discourage you from sharing this stuff. It takes only a few seconds of effort for you, and it creates a huge benefit for us because it helps spread our message and helps us spread our brand, and that's a big help for us. So if you think that our message is worthwhile, if you think that our message means something, if you would like more people to hear these words, if you would like more people to engage with these thoughts, then please share this stream.
Caleb, could you please turn your camera face a little bit more upward?
How's that?
A little bit more. It's very strange the way the Discord. Okay, good. So my screen capture is really strange. I'm gonna figure out this stuff sometime.
And now we've got 5 watching it, 5 upvotes. This is fantastic. Also, greetings, Miss Silvana.
Oh, hi, Silvana.
Always good to see you here. Greetings, Nitrogen Schmitrogen.
Nitrogen.
I'm glad you're here as well.
Is Caleb's audio still gone? Oh no.
Nope, I can hear myself on stream.
Oh, good. So good. Okay.
And you know what? Oh, hey, we're at 6 upvotes with 5 watching. I don't know what happened, but it's
different
great.
people watching. This is great. Anyhow, Mr. Beers. So the whole thing about normalcy, and I think that it's interesting because I believe there's a rhetorical question that goes, well, what did you go out in the desert to see? A reed swayed by the wind? And there's this basic idea that the fashions and things of that nature will change with time, but there are certain principles that I would assume shouldn't, although in certain aspects I guess they do wind up changing with the time. What winds up being politically correct to say now might not be politically correct to say later, but still, I suppose even in certain situations, good manners isn't. Would you mind turning your microphone gain down just a little bit? I'm hearing myself echo. Or if you have a headset, that would be wonderful.
That's a good idea. One moment, keep talking, and I'll put these in.
Great. So when there are these things that are popular. And generally this tends to happen because people don't think before speaking, and they don't think before acting, but they just act on emotion and on impulse, and then just kind of keep on pushing the consequence off, pushing the consequence off, pushing the consequence off, acting immaturely, acting inappropriately, acting wrongly toward other people, and expecting to not have repercussions. Eventually those things will catch up. But I think, well, we're already going. We're going down this route, so we might as well go and take another dump on modernity. This is entirely based on the failure that, a gigantic, copious number of failures of modern life. Why then? Why is it that people's tolerances for things are cyclical? What is behind that phenomenon, do you think, Mr. Pierce?
That people's tolerances for things are cyclical? Well, I think it's I think it's a case of, what's a good way to put this? People's tolerances for things are cyclical. I don't think it's cyclical so much. It may be cyclical in the long scheme of things, but in the short scheme, what we're seeing is passing the height of a curve and then going back down. The thing is, it's not a sine wave like this. It's a parabolic curve that started, say, 400 years ago, and it has a lot of bumps when you zoom in close on it, but it's a parabolic curve that started 400 years ago. And we just crested the wave of it. So what's going on is that we just, the reason that people's tolerances are cyclical, though, the reason that there's a backlash effect on a lot of things is because there is a reality, and there is a reality inside of people's heads that is not strictly social. Not strictly social. And here's what I mean by that is, for example, I was discussing political correctness earlier, which is to say that, to recap for any of the new viewers, your view of what is normal is based on your perceptions of what everyone else thinks is normal. And when you think that everyone else has a false belief, you won't contradict the false belief because you believe that you will be castigated for doing so. However, what happens is when a bunch of people are forced to say something that they know to be false, it makes them angry. And the more severe that social sanction gets, the angrier those people get until there's a blow up, and it's called Trump. So what happened is we've seen this huge backlash, but once that illusion is broken, it's impossible to put it back in because the genie's out of the bottle, the milk's out of the glass, the cat's out of the bag. Everything has ended in that regard. So the people who have been unable to see, or the people who have been unable to speak, are now speaking, and because of the internet, which is not a way, it has created a wave that is going to destroy the established order. And I don't mean that in an apocalyptic sense. I just mean that our old way of thinking is quickly going out the window, and a lot of these conceits and this false consensus that we've been under is going to go away. In fact, it's already gone, but it's never going to come back, because what happened was that the internet became widespread, and that allowed the right wing to latch onto it and to begin to spread their message. And because that was the only way they could do it, they weren't allowed to do it through the established institutions. So as a result, the right wing became extremely adept at using the internet, clamped down and gained dominance of it like that. And now, even if the left tries to do it, they're going to be way behind. They're going to try to rely on the established institutions. They're going to limp along while the right shoots ahead. And the right has already clamped down and gotten control of these new ways of communicating. And it's basically game over.
Okay. So, could you back up and explain for the viewer why is it? Well, first off, we have viewers from all over the world. So what is it that you mean by right and by left?
By right, I mean, by the left, what we mean are people that are associated with politics or globalism. And identity politics and globalism go hand in hand, because in order to create, in order for globalism to succeed, you need to not have any degree of sovereignty or any degree of actual identity in any given country. So you use identity politics to try to make every country into sort of a melange of competing interests and people who hate each other and spread discord and polarization and strife, so that the only hand that can still it all is the strong arm of the government, which becomes more and more multinational over time. Now, there's no conspiracy behind that. Like I said, it's an ideology. Again, it's like a school of fish. There's no single fish that controls the direction of the school. It's just that every fish follows the fish in front of it, and so they all have a cohesive direction. And that's what we see with established institutions, which are now dying because it's being replaced by the internet. And they can't put the clamp down on the internet because there are too many people with too much money sunk into the internet. They can't shut it down. They can't even censor it because that would make it too unprofitable. And their typical methods of censorship aren't working, and the right already has control of it and is pushing that advantage in a brutally effective manner. Now, to define what I mean by the right, I don't think you can give a strict definition of it because it's a very vague phenomenon, but by the right, I mean people who prefer more traditional or more old-fashioned ways of seeing things, people who prefer a more perennial way of thinking, especially people who reject modernity and who reject modernism are very much on the right. And as a result, what we're seeing is that the right has a stranglehold on the public mind now, especially young people, and it's not going to go away. The right has won. They have won, and the left will continue to rely on their old means and their old power base of trying to censor, trying to outshout the right, trying to drown them out, and failing miserably because nobody's listening to them anymore. You know, you can scream all you want through CNN and MSNBC and even Fox, your sort of neoliberal globalist or identity politics. You can do that all you want, but it's not going to work because the internet is the place where all this happens now. Trump used the internet to get elected. The internet is now the place where all of these ideas flow, and the right has already taken such a stranglehold on it that even if you got rid of all the right-wingers that are on the internet now, the rest of the internet would turn right because it's been so deeply penetrated by right-wing memes. And that's now to bring that all back around to this Sarah Jiang business. Sarah Jiang was putting out these tweets that anyone else would get fired for if they were about any ethnicity other than white people. But what is interesting about Sarah Jiang is that she is getting shamed so hard for this, deservedly, and the double standards being pointed out with such blatant, blistering clarity, and so forcefully that the legacy media can't recover from it. Everybody sees it. Everybody knows it's there. It used to be taboo to speak about that double standard, but that taboo is gone. That taboo has vanished. That the spell is broken.
Well, in certain circles, it's no longer taboo.
Right. Well, that's the thing.
There are circles that will fizzle away and die.
But one.
And that circle will fizzle away and die, but I still am personally concerned that we may have violence ahead if things do continue to go the way that they do go. And unfortunately, people get so attached to ideas, wrong though they may be, that if they wind up getting funding and are unsatisfied with the way things are, they could be pushed to very extremist tactics and consider what they're doing completely normal, consider what they're doing completely reasonable. The West is, if we're looking at what winds up happening in terms of geopolitical events, you know, war is unfortunately still very much on the table, although it may manifest itself very differently given the nature of technology today.
Right. And, you know, I don't want to encourage political and I'm not going to say that we should become violent. However, that the vast majority of the violence is coming from the left, and everyone in the media and in institutional channels is talking about evil right-wing violence and Nazis, but that's not what we've been seeing.
Well, they're turning a blind eye to reality.
Exactly, and that's why they have to lose. Well, you can't ignore reality and win. You can run on for a long time, but sooner or later reality cuts you down.
Well, the means by which leftism destroys itself is ultimately or not ever inclusive enough, progressive enough, whatever it is that you are doing in order to play identity politics, you're somehow leaving someone out that's going to get angry. And so then you wind up having a house divided against itself that will not stand. And ultimately, I think that is going to take the left dividing against the left in order to take down the left.
Right. And that's the issue, is that I want to explain how a purity spiral works, because I think that's very useful in this context. In order to do that, I'm going to have to backtrack and explain a little bit about cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive dissonance in the technical sense used in psychology is this thing where you have a model of reality, and if something contradicts your model, you can either change the model or reinterpret reality to make it fit your failing model. For example, there was an experiment done where the subjects were asked to eat a dried cockroach. And in half of the cases, the experimenter was very nice, and in the other half, it was rude. In the cases where the experimenter was nice, the people could admit that the cockroach tasted terrible. In the cases where the experiment was rude, the subjects rationalized and said that the cockroach didn't taste that bad because they didn't want to think that they had eaten a cockroach, a nasty cockroach, for a big jerk. That's a case of cognitive dissonance. Now, what happens in an ideological group where people are basing their superiority and their feelings about themselves on how they feel about their in-group and out-group, whenever they meet something that contradicts their model of reality, what will happen is that they will become very incensed and experience a lot of cognitive dissonance, because for example, if you're an SJW and you see all this stuff about Sarah Jeong, or you see that Trump got elected, it'll contradict your model. But what they do is they double down on their model and keep on saying it louder, because that's what allowed them to create a false consensus in the past and bend everybody to their will. And what they can't get through their little peanut brains is that doesn't work anymore. That constantly repeating and doubling down on the same ideology and ignoring reality and just forcing everyone else to agree with you no longer works, and it never will work again.
Well, it only works within certain echo chambers.
Spiral.
It only works within certain echo chambers.
Exactly, and the thing is that echo chamber is getting small. What happens? Tiny hitting out and lashing out against everyone. But the whole time, their circle is constantly shrinking, and their control over the institutions is being broken left and right. Some of the institutions will hold on for a while, but if those institutions which hold more tightly to leftism will just become less and less relevant. So what's going to happen is, if there is violence in the end, it's going to be a small group of crazies getting absolutely annihilated by everyone else.
Well, the question is, are they actually going to get annihilated? Because it seems like very many of us are too nice to actually annihilate anybody.
Oh, well, annihilated doesn't have warfare. Annihilated can just take the form of us all ignoring them and going about our business, and then they shrink away and shrivel away and expire into nothing. And it ends when the last one of them dies of old age.
So basically the same way any lasting social change takes place.
Precisely.
It's interesting because the saying, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks," is and I can't. There we go. The saying, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks." I'm going to need to make sure that I don't get any. Okay, there we are. Streamer mode enabled. There we go. Now I'm not going to go and get any other notifications or anything like that on Discord. And I completely lost track of what I was saying. So, ultimately, yes, the right, i.e. the right side, in this particular ideological battle, which is interesting because I would say that the left has its basis more on an ideology than does the right, although there certainly are right-wing ideologues that are misguided in certain ways. But I think that it's very important for people to be prepared to live within the general scheme of reality, and by scheme of reality I mean I think it's important that people understand how the real world functions, that people understand what's going on, that they're not left completely high and dry when leftism essentially ruins. When leftism comes to ruin, I don't like the idea of seeing everybody clueless. Now, of course, humanity is such that...
I'll be right back.
Okay,
keep talking.
Of course, humanity is such that we tend to respond very well to short-term, short-range stimuli. We tend to respond very well to the acute. The chronic, the little bit by little bit, winds up being difficult for us. And if we go and we see a paradigm shift, we will figure something out. And interestingly, due to the fact that the right is predominantly free market, at least the right in accordance with the political schema of the United States in this sense, given that the right is more free market, people will wind up being creative. That is also the creative process is going to involve a lot of people coming to the table with ideas, some of which work and some of which do not. Because ultimately, people are still going to want life to go on. And when you wind up having people not being so reliant on big government, then people are going to have to figure out how things work for themselves and stop trying to outsource things to other people. Now granted, you may wind up having the same people performing the same roles, except for there will be a great number of people that would have been employed by the government in the present day that are no longer and have to find some sort of productive use of their time if they actually want to get a piece of the pie or to increase the size of the pie. So I think one of the most important things that people can do is to teach themselves economics, or to learn economics from somebody else, to teach themselves a bit of philosophy, to teach themselves basically to ensure that they're properly educated. And by properly educated, I don't necessarily mean educated by any school system, because the primary purpose of schools is to homogenize the students. And the most effective society is one where there is a certain degree of coherence in terms of basic values. You know, if we all agree that we're going to, for instance, work within a free market and not, or that it's going to be socially wrong to aggress on another person, or something of that nature, then we set a particular very, very loose, very broad code of conduct for everybody. But then ultimately, people's own decisions will result in them getting wherever they want to get in life. And if we go and understand things going back from an economic perspective of Say's law, which states that what it is that we produce winds up being what it is we have and what it is we can trade for what it is that we want. So ultimately, our goal is going to be to produce things of value to other people. And in producing things of value for other people, lots of people aren't actually used to doing that. Because in many aspects, I mean, and yeah, of course there will always be employees, because it's easy to just do and not think. It's easy to outsource your thinking to somebody else. And as long as you wind up getting food on the table and so on, you'll be happy. But I think that the whole idea of entrepreneurship and the whole idea of taking life by the horns is one that needs to be encouraged in young people. You know, the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, really is, in this case, sort of relevant, except for necessity will wind up having the old dogs learning at least enough new tricks to stay alive. But if we wind up teaching children entrepreneurship by basically not babying them, not putting the kitty gloves onto them, by forcing them to from a very young age. And I don't mean forcing them in any kind of a big government way. I mean parents just saying, okay, let's go and figure out what we can do today that will be productive. And ultimately taking a great deal of the educational process into their own hands and allowing life and cause and effect to be the teachers, we will wind up helping the upcoming generations to flourish. Of course, part of the thing that needs to go is the current institutionalized educational system. The current institutionalized educational system is good for one thing and one thing only: making compliant cogs in a machine. And it's interesting because people's ideas of reality always go generally based upon what the latest technology is. People viewed themselves as cogs in a machine during the industrial era. People view themselves as nodes in a network during the information era, and so on. But the fact of the matter is, every single one of these models fails to account for the organic nature of humanity. The fact that reality is not one big computer, it is not one big machine. And so, the very best teacher winds up being reality itself. And you can't ever perfectly simulate it. The best teacher is the school of hard knocks. And if we want to learn
the only
something,
real rules are the rules of cause and effect.
Yes. And if we have these rules of cause and effect, and we can read in history what has happened, unadulterated history. If we can actually see, okay, this happened, and then this came and followed, and that came and followed, and this is how people reacted. Or you can read more specifically biographies of people. Okay, this person did this and achieved this result in this context, and so on. Then we can go and find out things to perhaps try new iterations of, or to attempt to emulate, or even attempt to do something completely new. But if we're doing it with our own skin in the game, then that's going to cause us to make considerably wiser decisions than if we don't. So the worst thing that we can do in trying to pilot this no longer fledgling ship, the absolute worst thing we can do is shield ourselves and those we care about from the consequences of their actions. One cannot fail to know that fire burns if one gets burnt himself. And I'm not suggesting that we, attempt to completely have a dog-eat-dog world. Of course, we're human beings. We can have compassion on each other. But the way in which we do so is completely, if we do it from a grassroots level, instead of as a top-down, blanket, centrally devised scheme, only that which actually does work in reality will remain, due to the fact that everything else will get eliminated on account of the fact that it doesn't jive well with the laws of nature, so to speak.
Right, and one thing that I would like to interject with is saying that
Mr. Beers, there's something about your microphone that isn't capturing. Like, it really captured every time you were typing, but now when you speak, you're going in and out. So I don't know what that might be.
I see. One moment here.
Alright, so we have 8 people watching. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning into the stream. This is our normal Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, Monday morning for some people, I guess. Order of events.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Well, I wanted to say that when we say that the only law saying that it has to be a dog-eat-dog world where there's no compassion, as you said. But we're also not saying that nobody should have protection from anything. Obviously, if my children are too small and weak to protect themselves, I'm not going to just leave them to die of exposure, because ultimately I get a better result if I protect them. But again, that's causality, because in the final analysis, compassion does play a role.
But there are certain things that you don't shield people from. Is little Susie getting a blister on her finger from touching the hot wood-burning stove something to shield her from? Is little Susie falling into an incinerator something to shield her from? I think that we can see the difference here. And one could conceivably say that I am a very horrible parent, due to the fact that when my kids were very little, I would light a candle and put it in the middle of the floor, and under close supervision watch my children say, "Don't touch that, that is hot." And invariably they'll play with it, they'll see how close they can get. They won't burn themselves. They won't. They'll come close, they'll back off, they'll come close, they'll back off. And then there's a new word in their vocabulary, hot. And then when they go and encounter, oh, well, there's the wood-burning stove, there's the oven, there's outside, then they understand what hot is, and they understand that too hot can burn them. You're not going to permanently hurt a child by teaching them what hot is with a candle. Now, are you going to let them lift their fingers and stick both fingers into an electrical outlet? No. You don't do that. The question is, ultimately, one, as a parent, of establishing yourself as somebody who cares for their well-being. If you go and tell them, don't touch the hot stove, and they touch the hot stove and they burn themselves, or don't touch the hot oven door and they touch the hot oven door and they burn themselves, you will have established yourself as a credible person. And in establishing yourself as a credible person, if you go and you tell them about things that are more dangerous, they will be more likely to listen to you than if you haven't established credibility in any tangible way. Children need these tangible lessons, some more than others, but everyone ultimately does need them. And depriving them of such lessons is one of the biggest disservices we can do to humanity as a whole, and especially to our own progeny. I was waiting for Mr. Beers to have something to say, but it seems we're going to have to wait on that a little while longer. Oh, hello, Amitabh. Good to see you. In many streams we have talked about Sipover. We've talked about the role of government, and ultimately, it seems that we can find many conceivably workable solutions. But one of the biggest things that we consistently run up against in principle is the fact that human beings are hierarchical in nature. We naturally will gravitate toward a hierarchical way of doing things. The question winds up being, how do we make sure that the hierarchy that we do have doesn't result in something bad? Okay, so would one gigantic global hierarchy, is that a good idea, or will it crumble under its own weight? Well, every single time that people have tried taking over the world, you can see what happens. So I would generally assume that, just based on past results, that it's a bad idea to try to take over the world. What is an ideal level? Well, if we look at Dunbar's number, we know that about 150 people, 148 people almost exactly, is the greatest number of people whose lives we can kind of keep straight in our own heads, with very few exceptions to this rule. So So having hierarchies structured around that number that naturally form, and then finding ways of basically allowing them to coexist in such a way that they don't completely destroy each other, or if they do destroy each other, that there's very good reason for it to happen, seems to be a good objective. Now, we've tossed around ideas like very limited monarchies with nearly anarchist tendencies. Almost a Tolkien-esque anarcho-monarchy, which I know doesn't actually sound like it makes sense, but Mr. Beers can definitely tell you about the practicalities thereof if you're interested. But we generally tend to, at least on this stream, and from what I've seen about lots of the people that tend to congregate with us, tend to be generally pretty libertarian in our outlook. Generally a live and let live unless you're hurting somebody else kind of an attitude. And then ultimately, if you are hurting somebody else, well then, how does that get rectified? Well, it should be contingent upon the general situation. Certainly we can develop laws, but they don't have to be this overbloated legal system that we currently have, where breathing the wrong direction, I'm sure at some point will wind up being against the law. Would you care to add something to that, Mr. Beers?
Well, first of all, bagel bites are food for Ubermenschen.
Am I going to have to censor
Second
you?
Of all, second of all, I would say that the fact that you can't simulate reality perfectly is a more specific case of a more general way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. In what way?
And that is to say that reality can never be fully captured by idealizations. Reality can never be fully captured by, say, a set of rules. You know, you can have things like physics that can give you a great approximation of very strictly controlled natural phenomena. You know, a very, very small slice of reality can be successfully predicted and controlled and explained by natural science, and that's wonderful, and natural science is great for that. But outside of that, we don't have these perfect models for things, and the success of natural science led us to think that we could, and we just can't.
Well,
so the
scientific
truth of it is not only can you not successfully model reality, you can't successfully capture reality perfectly with any set of rules. All you're left with is reality and your ability to adapt. That's it.
Yes. And interestingly, I mean, you can go and look at the scientific method, and for what it is and for what it sets out to do, it's perfect. But going and putting it on a pedestal on which it does not belong, in terms of imputing to it the ability to discern things that it can never, on account of what it is, discern, is ultimately going to be very counterproductive and bad for you. Or for anyone.
And that's why psychology is not a science.
I mean, a whole lot of things are not a science. A lot of things that people call science are not science. You know, if you go and you look at some chemistry journals, you can go and find people that are not doing science and touting it as such. You still need to be discerning when you go and you read things and when you look at things and when you understand things through the lens of the scientific method. Because that's all science is a method. And interestingly, that method is very limited in the things that it can prove. First off, it cannot prove anything. It cannot prove anything as an absolute. It can only ever disprove things. But once you get to a particular threshold of having things being not disproven, you can generally tend to take whatever that claim is and take it to the bank as fact. But you do have to understand that is limited by whatever observational methods you had in taking a look at whatever it is you were looking at. Science is empirical. And there are also one of the biggest things that scientists fail to account for in their models and so on is the null hypothesis. So basically, if you're analyzing cause and effect in the natural world, in the natural sciences, if you're trying to figure out if there exists a relationship between A and B, and you say, if A, then B, and then you observe A and you observe B, or if you observe that doing A causes B, but you fail to observe, for instance, whether or not B would have happened anyway, then your experiment is completely worthless. That little thing alone messes with scientists all over the place, messes with bad scientists, because many bad scientists don't take into account the null hypothesis. And so if you wind up having fields of, psychology can't in many aspects deal with a null hypothesis in certain ways because the situation is far too chaotic. And until we wind up being able to sort through the degree of chaos that's necessary, there is no way that psychology will ever be a science. I mean, biology is iffy. Chemistry can be in certain situations iffy, but I would say, okay, physics is a science. I'll say chemistry is a science. I'll give you that, and I'll give you biology too. At least the part of biology that generally deals with empirical proofs. There are certain aspects of biology that one can never go and call scientific, due to the nature of the inquiries and the nature of the empirical evidence. Observing or rather not being able to have an impact on boundary conditions or initial circumstances, and then going and saying that, okay, we actually know how things work, in many aspects winds up being among one of the many pinnacles of hubris, which incidentally is a topic with which Caleb is very familiar, not because he particularly is arrogant, but because he's gone and made quite an interesting study of the subject. So would you care to talk a bit about hubris, Caleb, while I go and, shall we say, take care of nature's call?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce.
Hubris, no problem. Hubris, in the ancient Greek sense, was overstepping your bounds. Things. Now, right off the bat, this is to modern people, because we like to believe that there is no natural order to things, despite we can understand nature through natural science, which is something that makes absolutely no sense, but modernity doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. Now, the idea of overstepping your bounds in the natural order of things has very little to do with human hierarchies, no matter what leftist theorists of history tell you. Overstepping your bounds in the natural order of things means that you have assumed that you can do something that you cannot in fact do. And one of those things is assuming that you can understand reality perfectly using idealizations, which is not possible. Now, what does that mean? That means that, for instance, if you try to say, okay, I have a perfect scientific system that can predict everything about it, and a total interpretive system for understanding human society based on economics, such as Marxism, you have overstepped your bounds because you have attempted to quantify that which cannot be quantified and idealize that which cannot be captured even imperfectly in idealizations. And as a result, you end up suffering for it because you get a crappy economic system that causes everything to go straight to shit, such as what happened in the Soviet Union. So what we're seeing there is a case of hubris. We're seeing people trying to understand things in a way that they cannot be understood. That's not to say that you can't understand economics or that it's all mystery. It just means that you can't understand it in the strict quantified way that you understand physics, and any attempt to do so will only yield falsehoods and distortions because you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. So this is a case where hubris can cause a lot of problems. So as a result, what we see here are people who double down on their hubris. When someone reaches a certain level of hubris, they lose the ability to see where their worldview has gone wrong. They lose the ability to change their worldview in order to fit reality. And then what happens as a result? What happens as a result when you cannot change to fit reality, is that you lose the ability to adapt. And when you cannot adapt, you suffer, or you lose your place, or you lose your resources, because if you can't change your model to fit the phenomena that you're encountering and insist on reinterpreting the phenomena to make them fit your model, you end up in a death spiral, which is what is happening to the left now. So that is the way in which hubris has created a problem for the left.
Well, that was quite a well-timed science related to food, diet, health. But your version of communism would work. Alright, I can't tell if you're being facetious or if you're being serious, Mr. Sipover, so please do expound. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. In the meantime, Mr. Beers, would you care to give a 20-second or less synopsis of what it is that you just said, so that I don't wind up sounding like a complete and total moron when I respond?
What I said basically was that hubris is an inability to adapt to that you have already, and that hubris creates a death spiral because it eventually catches up with you.
Okay, so you're going with a very classical definition, then, it seems.
Right.
So, what is with these very, very old-timey words and ideas that seem to generally go undealt with in present day, or especially in present day academia? Why are these basic ideas like not overstepping your bounds and so on not brought up commonly? Why are people being told, okay, just be who you want to be, Barbie girl crap?
Because we've fallen into a self-referential psychosis that contradicts our model, and we've fallen victim to hubris. And once you fall victim to hubris, you cannot have hubris explained to you. As Kierkegaard said, a delusion cannot understand the thing that would dispel the delusion, which is the one thing it needs most, because that's the very definition of what a delusion is.
And so ultimately, it only ever can be the school of hard knocks that teaches certain lessons when they're necessary. This reinforces my belief that the role of parent is the single most important role in all of society. And speaking of which, anybody that decides to poo-poo the role of parent and say that somebody who views that as an honorable calling is missing out on life, I don't even know how to begin to respond to you, because there's numerous, nearly so numerous that they actually aren't numerous because they can't be numbered, ways of taking apart that idea. But now I'm going to go and look at the chat and see what people have said. Nice. So Sipover has okay, good. Whew, we're not going to have to go and deal with that gigantic mess. Yeah, the whole my definition or my idea of communism, my version of communism would work is very interesting, because ultimately people go and admit that people won't just go and become communist. People will, at their basest level, understand the selfishness that is inherent to human nature. And they will realize that essentially the only way that you get socialism to work is with blackmail of some sort. Because you can't bribe anybody with socialism, right? The only people you can bribe with socialism are the people that don't have to do anything. And then you can blackmail the people that do in order to get the socialism to work. I mean, communism is an unachievable ideal. But then everybody that's ever tried socialism goes and says the same thing. Okay, we're going to do things better. We're going to improve upon this. People didn't actually go and do what Marx said. And I understand Marx better than they did. No, you don't understand Marx better than they did. The reason that socialism doesn't work, the reason that communism doesn't work, isn't because it isn't a beautiful sounding utopian idea. The reason that communism doesn't work, and therefore the reason that socialism doesn't work, because it's literally trying to use force to achieve a communistic end, is because it runs counter to human nature.
And they will deny that there is such a thing as human, and then fall afoul of human nature again. They just win because their model rejects the very thing they need in order to understand why the model is bad.
It is a delusion. It's ultimately saying that we will somehow be able to transcend who we are, as opposed to working with who we are. It goes back to what you were saying before I left, even about the importance of changing your model to fit reality, as opposed to trying to cram reality into your model. And interestingly, the ancients seem to do a pretty good job of understanding reality well enough to function therein. Ultimately, because the people that failed to do so died. Poverty and sickness and all these other things were very, very cruel teachers. And the people that made it through wound up learning a lot of lessons, which we would do well to at least understand and apply to our own context, and at most emulate. And of course our situations are different than that of previous generations. I'm not going to go and completely throw all that away and say, well, yeah, we are in different circumstances, but the fact of the matter is, we as human beings, through however long we've existed as such, have not actually had enough time to change who we essentially are. That's just a very bold, something that I would call a fact of life. And it can make things a little bit difficult to deal with if you want to go and talk about how simple life is. Ultimately, if, for example, we go back to the sphere of economics, price signaling is one of the most complex, or one of the least simplistic, simple phenomena in existence. Why does price signaling work? Price signaling, the cost of something, what people are willing to give up in order to get something else, is incredibly complex. Because ultimately, you wind up having to have people in a free society of mutually coming to a deal. And mutually coming to a deal means that whatever goes into both parties winds up getting factored into their values calculation. And if you're dealing with money, then you have to understand, okay, what is the monetary value of this versus that? and then you have to think, well, what are the relative values of these different things? What am I willing to give up? For what? And it just so happens that if we do wind up having a monetary standard, then we can go and make our decisions based upon what is cheap, due to the fact that that means that the maximum amount of utility that could be derived from any source at any particular time, to the very best of that which we as human beings could ever conceivably imagine in any scenario, will take place if people go and make the best deals possible. So that may sound incredibly simple, and it may sound, well, why can't we just, impute a different... Oh, not impute anything, I'm sorry, I used the wrong word there. Why couldn't we just go and say, well, why don't we make decisions differently? Why don't we have a centralized authority going and dictating to everybody what to do? And the reason is because the bare bones practical reason is because the authority can never know, can never be in possession of every single little nuance, every single little piece of information necessary for making the decision, except in as much as would be communicated by price. And that little thing, that one very small thing that ultimately people can go and say, oh, greedy capitalists just want to make a profit. So greedy capitalists just want to produce value. Because if they're not producing value, they're going out of business. Greedy capitalists, because of what they want for themselves, are forced to do good things for other people. Communists and socialists are not forced to do so. They're just forced to follow orders. And if you wind up having an nincompoop giving the orders, and by definition, anyone, no matter how intelligent, will be a nincompoop because he will not be privy to all the information. Capitalism beats socialism every time. And it's not because socialists are necessarily mean. It's not because socialists don't have good intentions. It's because it runs counter to human nature and results in incredible inefficiencies at the very best, and at the very worst, people die. It's cruel, and you need to kill people in order to perpetuate it, as demonstrated by every single place that socialism has ever really taken root. Looking at what Amitabh has to say. Individual philosophy, or an equivalent philosophy for an individual as socialism, communism is for a society. Solipsism, yeah. Yeah, it just winds up being expanding the boundaries to dealing with everything within a particular ideal, and then not being willing to deal with outside information. That is why socialists don't like dealing with capitalists. It's because they go and immediately label everything capitalist equals evil, and that is the extent to which socialists deal with capitalism. Because as soon as they start trying to make real arguments, they wind up getting beaten out, simply due to the nature of what capitalism is. It may not feel good, but the fact of the matter is, it's the most compassionate thing we have in this entire world when it comes to methods of making determinations of what gets done and what is left undone. You combine human ingenuity with freedom, and that's what you get. And you make the best use of human ingenuity and natural resources when the freedom is maximized. Because people will not, as a whole, make decisions against their own best interest if they themselves are the ones making the decisions. Now, certainly there might be altruists that go and try to do things that are good for other people at their own expense, but the fact of the matter is they're still going to all be aiming for a positive outcome. and they're going to have at least the best tools that we currently have in existence at their disposal in terms of the way that information is communicated through markets. A market is nothing more than information communication. Don't try to say that the market itself is much of anything more. The consequences, of course, generation and transfer of value. But the actual market itself is the transfer of information, and then people going and making decisions based upon that information and then transferring their value as they see fit. Ah, yes, the core of the left is utopian in nature. They don't want to work with what we got. They want to tear everything down and build something perfect instead, which is impossible. You are right on top of things. And Mr. Beers, you're absolutely right in saying that they begin from the premise that human life is bad until leftism makes it better. I mean, we could even begin from the premise that human life is bad and that we are in it for ourselves to make things better. I mean, that's another fair premise to start things with. And then ultimately we're left with the thing, okay, well, who is better for making a decision for you? You or somebody else? And if you say somebody else, well, would you like to just have that somebody else be arbitrarily assigned to you? Or would you like to be able to pick that person? Would you like to be able to pick an investment advisor? Would you like to be able to pick a teacher? Would you like to be able to pick a mentor? Or would you like to just have one assigned at random to you with no guarantee as to whether or not that person would be good? Freedom allows you to make the best decision for yourself based on your own goals. So maximizing liberty is a very safe tack when it comes to humanity as a whole.
Precisely. Now, I think that one big issue, question of how do you deal with things when you realize that stuff is imperfect, that it can't be made perfect? And the idea is to go ahead and accept imperfection, look for qualitative improvement, look for ways to improve your lot in life that yield real results, and assume that there's a reality that's independent of you that will predict.
Exactly. And removing yourself from reality and aiming for perfection, as opposed to remaining in reality and aiming for perfection or improvement or whatever. Well, the difference ultimately there is, are you remaining within reality or not? Not what you're aiming for. And sometimes it might only be realistic to expect a marginal improvement. But guess what? One marginal improvement after another leads to long-term productivity growth. And long-term productivity growth is what caused us to live in, at least in the West, and in many parts of the West, where a symptom of poverty is obesity as opposed to malnutrition. I mean, of course, you could say some obese people might be malnourished, but the fact of the matter is, when else in all of history have people that lack resources compared to other people been fat? They have been skinny, and sometimes within days of losing their life due to hunger. Long-term productivity growth gets you there, and human ingenuity is the engine behind this long-term productivity growth. And of course, and that's a very imperfect analogy. Don't go and try to quote me as saying that human ingenuity is an engine, but I think that you get the the limits of that particular analogy.
There we go.
And so, there's some hard-to-swallow pills. There's some sacred cows called.
And how do we make this happen? How do we make people realize it? By propagating it. The way that we make this happen is by saying it over, by getting on YouTube, by getting on the internet, by going everywhere we can with this, and just spraying this message out and saying it over and over again until we pull people into our orbit who begin to say it as well. And if we say it in unison, we would drown out the lies.
It's interesting because we wind up using many of the same tactics that liars do. But the fact of the matter is, the thing that differentiates us is that what we are doing is based in reality, whereas whatever it is they're doing is not.
Precisely. And when what you're saying is true, that helps. Ultimately, when what you're saying is true, Veritas, do lies win some of the time? Yeah, sometimes they win centuries, but it always falls over because eventually reality comes back to bite you in the ass when you believe a lie.
And I would prefer not to be believing a lie that would continue to have, poor effects on my progeny. I mean, ultimately, what is it that we leave but our genetic material and our legacy? And when we're dead and gone, what's left? What's left here? And one could conceivably say, well, with AI being what it is, people could, live forever. There's the possibility of that. There's a possibility to put your brain in a jar and hook yourself up and whatever. And I guarantee you, if somebody did that, they would eventually kill themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's life, at least insofar as I've ever been aware, and has been true for all of history, life comes to an end. And so, we will allow that death, the inevitability thereof, to lend us a sense of significance to what it is that we're doing, and who it is that we're becoming, and so on. We've been streaming for an hour, 29 minutes, and
on
34
believing a lie,
seconds.
what would you say about religion? Believing that lie has turned out well for civilization. Well, how much of religion? Now, even people who do not believe in a particular religious dogma or a particular theology may be willing to concede, for example, that the belief in a transcendent reality or something that is not dependent on humans is very beneficial because it is true. The belief that there is some kind of eternal law may be necessitated by the belief in an external reality. So, in a sense, the reason religion has turned out well for us, if you're starting from the premise that every specific theology is false, the reason it's turned out well for us may be that there is a grain of truth in it.
But here's the question. Is the premise that every single specific theology is false actually an accurate premise? And the thing is, that is not within, and never will be within, the domain of science to dictate. So going and saying, I'm scientific, therefore I'm a-religious, it's not illogical, it's just illogical. There is no logic whatsoever by conflating being scientific with being a-religious.
Right. Because science ultimately can only comprehend a very small subset of very, very for that task. The problem is that you can't build a comprehensive worldview and a civilization on science, and we know that because we've been trying to do it for 100 years and it hasn't worked at all. What we've ended up with is something that is very materially prosperous, granted the successes of natural science and technology, but despite being materially prosperous, we're facing down this nihilism that's making people suicidal, homicidal, mass murderers, etc. We're facing down people in prosperous places like Europe converting to Islam just to have something to live for. What does that tell you?
It says that Bacon and Descartes and Hume and Fichte and so on. I mean, I'll just go and I'll name those four, and I'll just flat out say a lot of what they're doing is predicated upon falsehood. Certainly, it can be internally consistent. And that's the job of a philosopher, is to be internally consistent. If you're not, then you're definitely screwed up. But, you know, one could say that, you know, Descartes started it. One could say that Bacon started it. And if you're talking about modern science as such, you know, there's a lot to be said for Bacon and Descartes. There's a great amount to be said for their contributions, and I'm not going to go and put them on a pedestal like philosophy departments do. And ultimately, I think it would have been possible to have the same kind of scientific revolutions as possible. The discoveries can occur without having a wrong paradigm, as long as people understand what the limits of science are. But as soon as people start going and imputing to science things that can't be imputed to science, then that's when we run into problems. I'm not being anti-science. I'm a scientist. I mean, of course I could be anti-science, but then I'd just be kind of stupid. But just because I'm a scientist doesn't mean that I don't believe in the transcendent, for instance. In fact, I'm very unabashedly a Lutheran. I am unabashedly a confessional Lutheran that believes what the Lutheran confessions teach about the world, and given an appropriate contextual understanding of the Bible with very few exceptions. That's my understanding of the world, and it in no way conflicts with the doing of science, with the pushing forward of society with technology and those sorts of things. Indeed, one could go within my particular worldview and put that under the banner of love thy neighbor as thyself.
Precisely. And, you know, I think that doing this kind of thing on the internet is great because we're just furthering the dominance of our way of thinking on this platform. It's been neglected by established institutions because they didn't trust something they couldn't control, and now it's out of their control, and we are making sure that we have thorough dominance over it. And the question is, can this be wrested from us? Yes, it can, but we're making sure that doesn't happen by explaining this over and over again and saying it in different ways and making sure that everyone understands it, because that creates a very strong resonance that will be impossible to dislodge. And the resonance really is the important part of it. It's making sure that everything
I'd be interested in hearing from the people in the chat some potential topics for future streams. What would you like to what would you like to see? I mean, there are certain things that I might completely say no about, like CTMU is out. I'm not going to discuss CTMU. And things of that nature, but by and large, I'm very interested in at least hearing your opinions, and then Sip over. It's going to be posted as a video on YouTube. So you'll be able to skip around once the video gets edited by YouTube and put up in its final form. I'm not going to be taking it down, and the stream isn't just a one-time thing. You can go and look at a repository of a bunch of older streams too, if you like. And while you're at it, if you don't already follow Mr. Beers, I highly recommend doing that. Mr. Beers, would you like to link your channel in the chat box?
It's in the description.
Did I already? Yeah, I already did that, didn't I?
You did, so go ahead and look in the description of this. And if you're not...
Say that again, you're breaking out.
You can look in the description of this video and use that link to find my channel. And you can also look at the little bell icon next to Matt Line's channel. What you do with Mr. Lina here is you subscribe to his channel and click that little bell icon, and you'll get a notification whenever he's live. If you have the YouTube app on your phone, you will get a notification on your phone whenever he's live. You can watch from there. You can watch from your computer. I strongly suggest that you subscribe to both of us. It would be a big help to us if you subscribed. It pushes us up in the YouTube rankings. It gives us more viewership. It gives us more view minutes. It gives us more of a platform to spread these ideas.
So basically, if you agree with what it is that we're doing, it certainly does help to follow, and then also hit the little bell icon. Hitting the bell icon is apparently very important due to the way that the YouTube algorithm has changed over time in order to prevent objectionable speech from getting propagated. So just, you know, I suppose that what we're saying here is objectionable to some. I don't care.
And yeah, that's one thing that I do want to... Button, going to my channel and clicking the button, that doesn't cost you a cent. It doesn't change anything. It takes, 10 seconds of your time, and it helps us immensely. So, please do it. If you can subscribe, it doesn't take a minute of your time. It helps. The benefit is incalculable because of the way that YouTube's algorithm, it pushes us up in the rankings, and it may one day make it possible for us to make a living doing this, at which point we can do this much, much more often.
And with much, much higher quality.
Right, much more often, higher quality, and on top of all that, we can do it with a massive... we can do it with much more freedom, because we'll have more time, and that means that these ideas will then explode. They'll go all over the place. People that will push our viewership up even higher. We are the future here. The future belongs to us. We are the people who are spreading the ideas that are not the ideology, but the ideas that are the next wave. And if you can get on that bandwagon, you're riding the crest of that wave. You were in it before it was cool. You are jumping on something before anybody else gets wind of it, and they will get wind of it, and that will happen faster if you subscribe, comment, like, and spread it around.
Indeed. And it's not just us, and that's the beauty of it, as you were saying earlier, Mr. Beers, that people have been using this as a platform for discussing certain ideas, and all sorts of people give their own take, all sorts of people give their own flavor, all sorts of people have their own particular emphases. And if what we're doing doesn't float your boat, well, then there are a whole lot of other people that could definitely use your support. If what we're doing does float your boat and you'd like to have more of it and you'd like it to be higher quality, then yeah, do feel free to support. Caleb has a Patreon. I have a PayPal.me or a Bitcoin wallet. I may or may not get a Patreon at some point. But if you'd like to throw a few bucks my way, I'm currently looking to upgrade some of my equipment so that I don't wind up having sound that keeps on going in and out. And that's about it. Hopefully a better internet connection, but really, at least for now, my wants are few, aside from the fact that I'd like to be able to be completely financially independent from having to do anything else other than put out right-wing propaganda. and to volunteer my time to things that I think are worthwhile. So if you're interested in sponsoring that sort of a thing, I would be incredibly grateful, and I'm sure Mr. Beers would be too.
I would be extremely grateful for any donations or any help you give. The thing that makes me grateful is spreading the word around. If you have a Facebook, post this. Post one of our channels. Post the stream. If you have a Twitter, if you're on Minds, if you're on Gab, discuss it with people. Go ahead and bring this up with people in conversation. Spread the good word. These topics we're bringing up, are these not good things to bring up when you're having a deep conversation with your friends? You don't even have to mention it was us. Just bring it up. What matters to me is the spread of the ideas. This isn't about my ego. I want to increase my notoriety so I can spread the ideas, but I personally don't matter. What matters is the idea.
One thing that I found, and I think we've discussed this in the past, but repetition is the mother of learning. One of the best environments that I've ever found is inviting people over, and I'm an introvert, so like one at a time, maybe two at a time, and if it's ever three at a time, that's like, I don't know, Christmas maybe. But inviting people over to bring a dish and have dinner together, and then maybe watching a short YouTube video or reading a piece or something as kind of something to give some context, and then just sit around, eat dinner, play cards, whatever it is that you do, and have a chat and discuss things openly and honestly. It's amazing the kinds of conversations you can get into when you are candid, when you are open, when you are honest, when you're not worried too much about being politically correct. In fact, all the nonsense about safe spaces aside, I'll tell you that my wife and I decided when we moved in together, which happened years after we got married because we were on opposite sides of the world. But when we finally moved into our single house, one of our primary objectives was to make it so anybody could walk in our doors and be safe to say whatever they had to say, whether they agreed with us or disagreed with us. We wanted our house to be safe. And ultimately making yourself the kind of a person that, you can poke fun at things, and you can have banter back and forth, and you can even say some idea is completely idiotic. And then you can also take it, right? If I can dish it out, I better be able to take it and in double measure to what it is I dish out. But having all of these interactions predicated upon the idea of mutual respect and goodwill, and then assuming goodwill of the people that you do interact with, even if they do disagree, and then you can show how, if someone disagrees in terms of an idea, you can destroy the idea and still be a bulwark for the person. In fact, I've seen that happen a lot with leftists, is that they'll go and they say, well, at least I don't agree with much of anything that you say, but I know that you're serious and that you're not actually hateful. It's interesting because a lot of this not assuming hatred happens only when we do have an interpersonal interaction with people. And that interpersonal interaction is risky. And it's something that we're not actually even taught all that much in this particular age, because you can go and grab an electronic device and have an interaction with something that doesn't necessarily interact the same way as a human being does. You learn to be passive receivers as opposed to active thinkers and listeners, and by active listening I mean engaging with the material and spitting things back as necessary. So there are these elements of personal development that can also go into this. I just happened to grow up in a household where deep conversations over the dinner table were normal. And so it's natural for me to do that with guests, but it can also be very, very disconcerting the first few times. But if you do it with people that you feel safe with, and you do it in a non-threatening environment with food and friends and so on, it can be wonderful. And I highly recommend it. History repeats itself. So free will, philosophical connotations in popular movies. History repeats itself. What can be learned from history? Well, I believe there's a Russian proverb that states that the only lesson history teaches us is that we don't learn anything from it. But you look deep in thought, Mr. Beers.
Well, I was just, I was often looking around Cora and such.
Did you find anything nice?
Well, I've been having internet arguments with people on there during the stream here and there, and it's been a lot of fun. People can't seem to even remember what they wrote 30 seconds ago.
Well,
which I find kind of funny.
It's the whole reed being swayed by the wind thing. And that's what happens when arguments aren't predicated on fact but on feeling. Because people's feelings, and that's yours and mine included, are easily manipulated.
Right, so the question is, how much do your feelings control? Can you feel something strongly and then do the opposite anyway?
I would say yes. It's completely possible. I mean, my wife and I, we both decided, for instance, that we weren't going to have sex until we got married, and I can't tell you how many opportunities we had. We never took them. And that was just based on our values. That was based on what we deemed important. And so we acted that way. If you want to, for example, get a good score on an exam, or not get fired from your job, I mean, don't be constantly checking your Facebook while studying. Don't be constantly not working while at work. All of these different things that you can say, oh, well, I just had a drive to it. I just had an instinct for it. I just felt like it. Well, no, you can control those. In fact, that's one of the biggest things that we do have our neocortex for. It's to be able to engage in this complex, rational thought and override our baser instincts. And yeah, certainly feelings can give us a sense as to, well, things might be right or things might be wrong, but those are just general senses and indicators, and they're very, very finicky. One's feeling about a particular subject matter might actually wind up being a feeling about one's own blood sugar level or level of sleep. Those kinds of things impact our feelings as much as anything else. It might just be indicators we need to take better care of ourselves before we can go and apply ourselves to the extent that we want to the things that we care about.
Precisely. And this has been a very successful stream, and we both managed to say a lot about what we think is wrong, what we think is right. And more importantly, we've had a good audience. We've gotten a lot of votes. It's been a successful stream, and I think that a big part of it is that, or at least for me, a big part of it was that I was feeling energized. When the world makes you angry, when you look at the way the world is and it pisses you off, what you do is you take that anger and bottle it, and you feed it into an engine, and that engine is ambition. Not for your own gain, although that can be part of it, but for a desire to change things. Use it as fuel. This ties back into what Matt was saying about emotions. Just because you're having a certain emotion at the moment doesn't mean that you're having an emotion that has to dictate your actions. You can redirect all that.
Exactly. And understanding what our emotions signify can be a very useful goal, and definitely a very useful activity to take place if we're interested in self-development. And I'm not going to say that I'm perfect at it, because I'm far from it. But I have noticed that being conscientious of what sorts of emotions I have, because I'm really good at labeling other people's emotions and knowing what other people are feeling, and knowing those sorts of things. Those sorts of things are very, very easy for me to figure out. But then going and reflecting on myself, that is a lot harder. And so I actually have a flowchart. I actually have a flowchart that I go through, and it's a very, very simple one. It's, okay, I am experiencing an emotion, therefore I start my flowchart. Okay, what emotion am I experiencing? Name it. Because naming it gives you power, because you now have characterized it to some extent. And you can pick a name with a lot of nuance. You know, am I angry or am I frustrated? Am I happy or am I elated? You know, and then you can expand your vocabulary about all these different subtle flavors of emotion. And then after labeling what the emotion is, well, you can think, well, what is it that this emotion signifies? What does this actually signify? Is this signifying that I'm actually having a problem with a situation? Is it my own physiology? Is it my own blood sugar, my own sleep level, my own nutrition, my own lack of being in shape or having exercised too much? Is it, or does it actually have to do with the situation I find myself in? Am I angry because this person is actually a threat to me, or am I angry because this person is reflective of a much bigger phenomenon? And you can go and be as deep as you want about the significance. But then once you go and analyze your emotion to that extent, you wind up becoming an awful lot more capable of making a rational and appropriate decision as to what to do with that emotion, as opposed to being a slave to it. You can use it for its intended purpose, which is that of an indicator. And I highly, highly recommend that practice. Even very inconsistent application, as I myself am guilty of doing, is orders of magnitude better than not doing it at all. Which, when I'm in my very worst states, interestingly, is when I don't do it, when I need to do it the most. So if you can improve upon it, and it's definitely not hard to be better than I am at it, I would dare suggest that you will see a dramatic improvement in the quality of your life. I'm thinking here in the next 6 minutes or so, or next 5 minutes and 40 seconds or so, or thereabouts, that we'll wind down the stream. Do you have anything that you would like to work into a conclusion, Mr. Beers?
Well, what I would like to say in conclusion to all of this is that these are very important ideas. These are very important truths, and they're things that we've lost over the past few hundred years because innovations in science and technology, while very useful, are things that we've gotten too starstruck about, too excited about, and thought that we could generalize them in ways that, in fact, we could not, because we had not yet discovered the limitations of natural science. So what I would say the ultimate point here is to re-acknowledge some very old perennial truths, integrate our understanding of science with that, and then use that to move forward. And that's the philosophical game plan that we as people in the 21st century need to be looking to. I would furthermore say that all of the political unrest we've been seeing lately is symptomatic of a much longer-term phenomenon. We may even see some setbacks or some temporary reversions to the mean, or reversions to the prior state, or toward the prior state, followed by more sliding in the direction we've been going. Because what we're beginning to see is the breakdown, the long-term breakdown of the modernist project, which really reached its height in the mid-20th century and has been on the decline for some time now. All of these phenomena we're seeing are symptomatic of that decline, and even the apparent augmentations of the modern mindset, even the apparent augmentations of modernism, are really just, so to speak, the ripe fruit beginning to rot. And it's falling from the tree, the smoke, and the apple's on its way down, cat's out of the bag, genie's out of the bottle, milk's out of the glass. There's nothing we can do to get it back the way it was, and we shouldn't even want to get it back the way it was, because what we need to be looking toward now is a re-acknowledgement of those perennial truths, integrating them with our scientific understanding, or rather integrating our scientific understanding into the perennial truths, because it forms a small part of them, and then using that to move forward as people, as civilizations, as cultures. And I think a big part of that, one thing that we're going to see over the next 50 years is revival of art. We're going to see art becoming good again. We're going to see art becoming original again. And paradoxically, or not paradoxically, but counterintuitively, as art becomes more original, it will go back to adhering to traditional, but will explore those traditional forms in ways that we could not have conceived of prior. So what we're going to see now is a revival in art, in culture. We're going to see philosophy going back to a more classical. We're going to see mass decentralization as technology makes it possible once again to do all of the things we need to do as a society without necessarily having a single governing body that controls the whole thing. And that is what we're going to see moving forward. Matt, do you have any concluding words?
Well, I was kind of hoping that we could end on your concluding words, simply due to the fact that it seems like we agree on so many different points, and you have, at least it's become obvious that you, over the course of the past half a year, have you've always been very strong with your writing, but you have become considerably more strong with your speaking. And so any opportunity to give you a platform is something that I am very willing to do. And then you also have this way of explaining the intuitive as opposed to for example, coming across as a little too heavy-handed. And so that's why in many situations I find it much more edifying just to ask a couple questions here and there and listen to what it is you have to say. Now, of course, if I have something to say, I'll say it. But at this point, I don't really have anything to say because you have so adequately and so eloquently put together a very cohesive, I mean, of course, we can always be more cohesive, we can always be more thorough, but in as much as these past 2 hours have shown us, you've done a remarkably good job of putting it all together, and I just want to thank you very much for your willingness on such short notice to be present here and to participate to the extent that you did. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for showing up.
Thank you, and you're welcome. I think that's all we have for now, guys. Until next